Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael and I've finished this old brewery tower on my model of a run-down West Yorkshire town set in 1993. The tower is based on the Shimla Spice building in Shipley, and on my layout it oozes the same kind of character as its real-life counterpart. When I look at the model, I think what really gives it that character are the little details that your eye glosses over at first glance. In this video, I will show how I approached the roof, gutters, dentils and stone arches. We'll also take a look at the downspouts and other details which finish this building off. I love the look of these stone dentils which run around the top of the building. When I added these to the town hall or the Earl Chandfield, I cut them from one piece of card that went on top of the building. But these ones are more spaced out, and you can see the stonework between them. The only way I could think of making these was to do them individually. And these things are tiny. Drawn in Inkscape, they're just 1.5mm wide by 2.4mm tall. The thin bit at the bottom is just 0.38 of a millimetre wide. I printed them onto sticky label and stuck them to 1mm thick card. I cut them into strips and did my best to cut along the little curved line. In reality, I just jabbed the knife and made a general impression of the shape. I dabbed a bit of stone coloured paint onto the shape before cutting it off its little sprue of card. I had printed guides and stuck them to the top of the building to help me get the spacing exactly right. I still ended up having to make adjustments after the glue was starting to dry, and then patch up the mess with a dot of paint. With 49 of them to make, this was a laborious and time-consuming process. It took over 2 hours, but I found it a relaxing and enjoyable experience. Once done, I coloured the edges of a piece of card with black marker, and then dropped it on top to represent the guttering. The roof is a lovely pyramid affair arranged around a central square. To get its shape right, it would be essential to get this central square, well, central. Using the dimensions of my card, I drew the central square and a set of ribs which would support the faces of the roof. I could then use my elevation drawings to work out the slopes of a set of triangles which would arrange around the square. It's important to leave space for the faces of the roof so that the shape is correct once every layer is in place. With this printed to sticky label, I cut out the roof guide, and then I very carefully stuck it onto the top of the building. With it in place, I went round the white edge with black marker so that it blended into the part of the gutter which was already in place. I now had guides on top of the building which would help me get the roof into exactly the right position. I cut the pieces of the central column, and then used my scale model scenery right angle jig to help me glue the 4 sides into shape. I soon had a central column which I could glue to the guide square on the roof. I took care to align the guides with the lines already on the roof, so I now knew exactly where to place the roof's ribs. These just glued into place along the guidelines. Since the guidelines were on the flat bit and on the central column, I knew that the pieces were straight just by sticking them onto the grey lines. I've made 2 videos about how to get the shape of the roof just right, and I've linked to these at the end of this video. But all I did was tuck the faces from my elevation drawings and stretched them to be the same height as the length of this slope. I printed these to 1mm card and attached them to the ribs. With a solid base in place, I printed another set in 0.5mm card, complete with tiling guidelines. These print out and stick to the solid base. Slightly shoddy construction of the little tower part meant that this bit didn't fit the first time, but a little trim and there we go. The tiles will cover any remaining gap. I soon had a roof ready for tiling, with lines to help me align the strips of tiles. The tiles are cut from strips of Scalescene's slate roof tile texture, and then carefully measured, cut and eventually glued into place on the roof. Sometimes it's best to do this whilst the roof face is off the building, but since this is such a complex roof, I find that adding the tiles with it in place helps cover any imperfections in the shape or fitting of the roof faces. Before the tiles got to the top, I added a little paper cover to the top of the column made from Scalescene's tarmac texture. I used Scalescene's ridging tiles to cover the joins. These are just strips of paper folded down the middle and cut to size. And finally, I made a little card lid for the central column. The real thing in Shipley sticks slightly proud of the sides, so I made the square 1mm larger than the column. I covered it in texture and dropped it on top. The recesses that house the windows are crowned with a lovely stone arch that sits proud of the stone walls. To make these, I printed the arches and supports to photo paper. and selected a sheet of the finest Weetabix box. Weetabix card is thin and very rigid. It's by far the best material for this job, because these pieces are tiny. I applied PVA glue and smoothed it onto the card. I used my steel rule to cut the base of the arches. The arches themselves were cut by hand. Take care here. Use light strokes and move the piece so that your knife is always moving in a comfortable direction. Take your time, and eventually an arch will emerge that is passable enough for the building. There will be a white edge caused by the paper's edge, but this can be covered by a watercolour pencil. I find that a warm grey is good enough to fill in for almost any colour. A line of PVA is all that's needed to fix it in place. These little supports are even smaller. Cut out with the ruler. Realise I'm about 1/4 millimetre out. Trim. Colour in the edge. Cut the other edge. Chop the first one off. It's hard to show just how small this little bit of Weetabix packet is, but I try to colour its edge with pencil anyway, and then place it onto the building. I use my ruler to help me get it straight. With these all in place, I think the building is looking great. A check of the Shipley prototype reveals a stone jib here, probably used to get the brewing ingredients to the top of the tower. I add this with a couple of bits of 1mm thick card. And I'm quite taken by this Chandwell-esque feature, the bottom part of a long-forgotten to let sign above a burglar alarm. Easy to add with a bit of paper. Scott's alarms feature elsewhere on the layout, and the Graham and Grant branding should be familiar if you've watched my videos before. Downspouts are just folded bits of paper, and I'll show these in a future video. With these details all in place, I use AK Interactive matte varnish and cover the whole building in a coat by brush. I love this building. It's ready to be filmed for Sita's Jasmine Tandoori advert, which I hope you all enjoyed last week. Adding these tiny details takes more time than making the shell of the building, but I think it's time well spent. Your eyes don't tend to see each individual detail, but the rich 3D nature of the building is what I think makes it look more realistic when you look at the layout as a whole. I've enjoyed making this tower, and I'm looking forward to you seeing it with the middle building in place. This one incorporates broken windows, which I've not done before. So until next time, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you then.